Hey everybody, this video is called What Does Your Arguing Prove? And tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Job, where we're looking at Job's response to Eliphaz. In the last couple chapters, we took a look at Eliphaz giving a message to Job, calling Job to repentance, to be, to have some relief from his trials. But now we're going to see Job has some words for this friend of his. And so Job's response, we're going to see it in today's chapter and the chapter next week in chapter 7. And so Job is going through a thing with physical misery with his trial. And we also saw back in chapter 2 that Job had a wife that was trying to bring him into temptation into cursing God. Now we see Job has another issue on his plate, and Job has to respond to his ignorant friend and insensitive friend by expressing his frustration. And you might have been there yourself when a friend or someone thinks they're being helpful when you're going through a hard time, but really, they're not really edifying you. They're actually making things worse. And so Job chapter 6, verse 1 through 7 to start out here, it says, Then Job answered and said, Oh, that my grief were fully weighed, and my calamity laid with it on the scales. For then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison. The terrors of God are arrayed against me. Does the wild donkey bray when it has grass, or does the ox low over its fodder? Can flavorless food be eaten without salt? Is there any taste in the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them. They are as loathsome food to me. So when you read Job's words, it can be pretty depressing, but when you understand the background behind why Job is writing this, speaking like this, you can have sympathy for him somewhat. And so the heaviness of Job's burden caused the rashness of his words. And in verse 4, we see he uses arrows of the Almighty and terrors of God. And those are figures of speech that Job is using to picture the trials as coming from God. And Job is indicating that he believed that these were God's judgment. So Job, he didn't have the revelation that we get with chapters 1 and 2 of, a situation between God and Satan over the servant Job. Job thinks, just like his friends, I must be, under judgment for something. In verse 5 through 7, they're illustrations of the fact that Job complained because he had reason. And even animals expect pleasant food. And I don't know about you, but when I have food, I don't want something that's flavorless without salt. And I gotta watch my salt intake. But if you're eating something without flavor, like, you don't want to eat. And you might had experienced COVID. If you ever had COVID, some people lost their taste senses, so they couldn't taste whatever they were trying to consume. And then I've heard, different scenarios of someone that's in cancer treatments. Sometimes in cancer treatments, everything tastes bland. Like, they lose their sensory for taste. And Job's first response to the words of Eliphaz were to complain about the greatness of his suffering. So Job is writing to his friend and saying, look, this is the real deal. This is how I really feel. I'm going to express myself to you. And Job's outbursts in chapter 3 were rash, but it was because of the excessive heaviness of his grief and probably trauma. And the picture of God shooting arrows in him is what Job opens with and he closes with. And Job described Eliphaz's words as weak and flavorless to him. And I don't know about you, but I believe the yellow yolk is better when eating eggs. The whites don't taste as good. The yolk is what gives it a better flavor. Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know about it. But in these metaphors, Job is given, a picture of how Eliphaz's words are coming across, that they're weak and flavorless. In verse 8 through 10, it says, "Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for, that it would please God to crush me, that he would lose his hand and cut me off. Then I would still have comfort, though in anguish I would exult. He will not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One." So Job has a request here. He's requesting that God would finish whatever process he began. And death was desirable for no other reason than it would be for relief from this unavoidable hard times, this unavoidable course of events. And in verse 9, we see "cut me off," and it's metaphoric from a weaver who cuts the access thread on the loom, as seen in Isaiah 38, verse 12. And Job hadn't been avoiding the revelation of God that he had received. The commands of the Holy One were precious to him, and he had lived by them. And this was confusing him, as he couldn't find any sinful source for his suffering. And Job would rejoice in his pain if he knew it would soon lead to death, but he couldn't see any hope for death or deliverance in himself. And in chapter 3, Job returns to believe that he would be better off dead. And like I said in the opening of the study earlier on, in the opening of Job, how many times have we gone through something that's really hard, and we might even prefer, to wish that we were dead instead of having to live through whatever the trauma or disaster is. One thing we must note, though, is even though Job is going to have some very uncomforting words for us to take in, he's not contemplating suicide, but Job wished that God himself would end his life. In verse 11 through 13 says, "What strength do I have that I should hope? And what is my end that I should prolong my life? Is my strength the strength of stones? Or is my flesh bronze? Is my help not within me, and is success driven from me?" So Job, he felt hopelessness, and we can sense the depth of Job's anguish. And Job's words are from the pain-racked man sitting on a burned-out place in a garbage dump, pretty much. In verse 14 through 23, it says, "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend. Even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty, my brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of the brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice, and into the snow vanishes. And it is warm, they cease to flow. When it is hot, they vanish from their place. The paths of their way turn aside. They go nowhere and perish. The caravans of Tema look. The travelers of Sheba hope for them. They are disappointed because they were confident. They come there and are confused. For now you are nothing. You see terror and are afraid. Did I ever say, bring something to me, or offer a bribe for me from your wealth, or deliver me from your enemy's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the oppressors?" So we see that Job rebukes his friend with wise words. And even if a man has forsaken God, which we see that Job hasn't, because God had called Job a blameless man, shouldn't his friends still show kindness to him? In verse 14, this is probably the verse that sticks out to me the most in the chapter. "To him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty." So, as a friend, the best thing we can do for our friends is to be kind to them when they are going through hard times. They don't need to be kicked while they're down. They don't need to be, they don't need to be condemned. They need to be lifted up. They need to have the kindness. And kindness goes a long way. And one of the impacts that Aiden had, my son Aiden, you probably know the story, in his 10 short years of life on this earth, when you talk to his teachers who had him, they described him as a kind kid. And I know I'm not always kind. I know that kindness is not a strong thing for me. But keep in mind about kindness. How can Eliphaz be so unkind as to continually indict him and beat Job while he's down? And Job described his friends as being about as useful with their counsel as a dry river bed in summer. And what Job is literally saying in 4 words, in a nutshell, is you are no help. He's pretty much telling his friend, you should take a hike. You're really not making anything better. And that's in verse 21. Although all I asked for was a little sympathy, not some great gift or deliverance. So Job wasn't even asking for deliverance when his friends were, when his friend Eliphaz was doing his thing. All he asked for was a little sympathy. And, sometimes as a friend, we need to show sympathy to those who are hurting. In the New Testament, I don't have the verse on the top of my head, but it says, weep with those who weep. In verse 19, Tema and Sheba, Tema was in the north, named for the son Ishmael, that we find back in Genesis 25:15 and Isaiah 21:14. And Sheba was in the south and was part of the Arabian desert. And that's where water was precious, as seen in Jeremiah 6:20. And all Job wanted was some words of comfort. In verse 24 through 30, it says, teach me, and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forceful are right words. And what does your arguing prove? Do you intend to rebuke my words and the speeches of a desperate one, which are as wind? Yes, you overwhelm the fatherless, and you undermine your friend. Now therefore be pleased to look at me, for I would never lie to your face. Yield now, let there be no injustice. Yes, concede my righteousness still stands. Is there injustice on my tongue? Cannot my taste discern the unsavory? So Job is not admitting to have sinned. Rather, he said to his accusers, show me where I have sinned. You're going to make these allegations against me. You need to show me where. And the sufferer indicted his friends for their insensitivity. And while not claiming sinlessness, Job was convinced that there was no sin in his life that led directly to his suffering. And for us that did our homework or listened to the early on, we see that these trials came upon Job not because of anything that he did. And so, for a quick wrap-up here, we see Job's response to Eliphaz as he explains, I got some rash words for you, and you're going to hear them. And we see Job long for God to grant the escape of death. And we saw Job lament his weakness, and we see Job criticize Eliphaz and defend himself. And we see the chapter, it closes with Job challenging his friends to point out his error and lack of discernment. And that's going to wrap up today's video. We'll see you next for Topical Saturday to be announced. And I know Topical Saturday, we haven't had one in about 3 months or so. So we're going to do a topical video on Saturday, nice, short, to the point. And I hope that you join us for that. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless.